Okay, hello everyone. My name is Morgan Schuler, and I'm an English teaching assistant this year through the Fulbright program here in Mexico City. I've been invited by Education USA to give a talk on graduate programs, essay writing. So I will be here working with them. They are a center that has 27 locations throughout Mexico, and they provide advising and guidance for US to study in the United States. And in addition to that, they have 450 centers in 180 different countries. So here in Mexico City, they're located in the Benjamin Franklin Library. And your points of contact will be Yandi and Sophia, who are available for any questions throughout the year and who will also hold other events like this. Okay, so let's get started with the presentation. Okay, let me just open it up. Okay, so here we have presentation here. Okay, excellent. So this is all about me, which you already met me. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the two different essays for graduate studies applications. The first is generally a study or research objectives essay, which is kind of like a description of what exactly it is that you want to study, or what exactly your project would be for your research. The second is a personal statement essay, which is more of like a story that tells about how you achieved your current position, and how this relates to what you want to do in the future. So they're a little bit different. We're going to go over the differences, and we'll go more into detail about what you should include in each essay specifically. Okay, we're going to start with talking about the differences. So first off, we have our personal statement, which is going to focus more on the past experiences that you've had within your life and how that led to your present position. And comparing this to your study objectives, this is going to focus more on what you want to do in the future or your future plans. So breaking down, going more specifically into the personal statement, it's going to focus on two specific aspects. So the first is going to be, how were you able to achieve your current goals? This is going to include what education, or tell us a little bit more about your education history, if you had any work experience or maybe professional experience such as internships, or any special interests, which could include extracurriculars, any other study opportunities you had that have led you to these achievements. And in addition to that, the second aspect would be, do you have any past events or factors that influence your educational or professional development? In comparison to that, the study objectives has two different aspects. It would be focusing on what it is that you want to study. This is going to go more into what type of program, what type of research do you want to look into, and what other fields of interest do you have that you want to continue on throughout your academic career. And the next part of the second aspect of the study objective would be why it is that you want to study it. You want to explain why this would be a natural fit with your academic path and how this would fit in with your previous experiences. How is this something that will continue on your professional road? And next, how will this help you in your future goals? So focusing on the study objectives, you're going to look at how this plays into what you want to do in your future career. Okay, so going from here, we're going to focus on these two essays specifically, breaking them down apart. So looking at the personal statement, for just the stylistic guidelines, we have the font for Times New Roman. It's generally in an academic paper, we'll do Times New Roman font, 12-point font size, 1-inch margins all around, and single spaced. So single spaced is, as you can see in this little example down here, there's no extra spaces in between the lines. The length will generally be about 500 words unless your school specifies a certain amount. If your school has specified that they would like a certain amount of words, or if they want it shorter or longer, you're always going to want to go with what your school has specified. Looking at this little example here, we say setting yourself apart by focusing on being non-generic, which is a statement that only you could have written and something that doesn't resemble what other applicants are likely writing. So what it is you want to make sure that this is something unique to you that tells your personal story, and it'll give more insight to who you are as a person that the admissions counselor may not be able to gather just from your resume alone. So this is an opportunity for you to explain yourself personally to the admissions counselor. Okay, going to the next slide. Okay, so to begin writing your personal statement, it's a good idea to just reflect on some certain your experiences, or here are some questions that can get you started. So the first one that you would want to reflect on is, what's interesting, unique, or distinctive about your life story? What unique events have happened to you in your life that have led you to this path? And going with that, what sets you apart from other applicants? What is something that will kind of show you off as an individual? This could include kind of your personal or family challenges, any history, or any notable accomplishments that maybe you want to explain a little bit more in depth. You can go also for the second question, what first made you interested in this field? Going back to talking about your educational background, this could be a good opportunity to explain what first piqued your interest and why you wanted to continue studying it. What reinforced your interest in it? And what's something that you want to continue to learn throughout that time? And then lastly, you can talk about, how have you learned about this field? What readings, internships, work experiences have you had related to it? So what exactly has continued to drive that interest? Are there any experiences outside your education that you've used to kind of feed into this interest? And is this something that could help you along in your future educational programs? Another question that's really important for the personal statement is, are there any gaps or discrepancies in your study history that you should explain? So the personal statement gives you an opportunity to go a little bit more in depth about your educational history. And this includes if there's any changes or maybe something that needs to be more explained in depth, this is a good opportunity to do that. So here we have two examples. So in the first, I went to a very strict military boarding school when I was in high school. And when I came to college, I'm afraid I let the freedom erode my first year's studies. Please note that my GPA for the last 2.5 years is 3.6 in my major. So we see in this example, he's explaining why there was a change in his GPA. This isn't, you note that he's not providing an excuse, but rather he's just explaining what exactly was going on in his studies at this point, and it's as an opportunity for him to show what he's grown, or from what he's learned from this experience and how he's grown. In the second example, we can see, my father experienced some unexpected business reversals in the spring of my freshman year, and I took a full-time job in order to complete the academic term. If we go down, if you do not count the year I was working full-time and going to school full-time, my GPA would be 3.35 overall. So here you see, this is a little different. He's talking about an outside extracurricular activity that affected his academics. And this is also, he's showing, rather than just providing an excuse, or he's giving extra insight about why that happened and why that's not necessarily reflective of him as a student. I think if you're planning to use this tactic, it's important to show why this is, how you've grown from it, and what's something that you're going to take from that experience and will change in your next studies. Okay, so looking at the personal statement, if you're asking yourself how you should start, here are just some general tips. So you want to start early. Give yourself ample time to write several drafts, to play around with different ideas. You don't want to feel pressed for time, because that won't give you a lot of time to edit your drafts or to kind of change. Maybe you have a different idea of what you want to write about later on. So you want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to really explore those ideas. The second would be create your resume. This is helpful just to have a list of all of the activities you've done, what you've studied, and from there you can reflect further on what experiences you've had, or maybe something that you want to explain deeper in depth to the admissions counselor. Going with that, with the next bullet point here, we have brainstorm examples of how you have demonstrated your interest or expertise in the field. So this would be a good opportunity to think of certain moments or certain events that you would like to kind of explain as a way to demonstrate your interest. So an example could be thinking more in depth about a certain moment in your internship or a certain research project that you've done that would show how you have included this in your educational background. Okay, the next point, think about how graduate school fits into your future plans. I think within your application, you want to explain how this is a natural step in your career and your future progression. So this is a good idea of really reflecting on why this is something that you want to pursue, and that could really drive your essays to show the main point, the main ideas for these. The next point, research program websites, talk to program alumni. This is just kind of as a good way for you yourself to recognize what it is about that program that really attracts you, or if this program is a good fit. These are all good things that you would be able to add to your essay in that event as well. Allow ample time to draft and edit your document, and have at least one person edit your document for grammar and style. So you want to make sure you're editing, or you're making several drafts and editing your document for typos, for any errors, and have at least one person, but I would say to try to get as many people as possible edit your document. They may just pick up on mistakes that you didn't necessarily see. Something else I would suggest would be to read your essay out loud. I find that I always catch errors that I didn't necessarily see when I was just reading it. So this would be a good tactic as well, just to make sure that you're covering any accidental mistakes. And lastly, I've included 4 or 5 drafts are normal. So it's normal to write your essay several times and to just kind of play around with different writing styles, or to avoid any typos that you may see. It's possible that you'll have several drafts of your essays. Okay. Oh, and if you have any questions as I'm going through the presentation, feel free to write them in and then I'll address them at the end. Okay, so here are some general do's and don'ts for your personal statement. You want to keep in mind the purpose of the statement. In 500 words, you really don't have a lot of space, so you want to make sure that you're keeping it concise, that you're including the important information, and you're not getting away from your main purpose. In the next point, tell a story or find an angle. So rather than just listing out your resume in narrative form or kind of just connecting them in words, you want to make sure that you're presenting it as a narrative, that you're telling more about yourself as a person, and you're providing info that the admissions counselor can't find on the resume. This will also attract the admissions counselor and it'll be more interesting for them to read as an essay. Draw conclusions about the values of your experiences. So when you're including these experiences in these examples, make sure that you're talking about what you've learned from these events. You want to show that how this has affected your development as a student, as a person, and how that's going to be something valuable for them to find when you're studying in their program. Use examples, especially the number of years when possible. I think it's just a good idea to be able to include any all of the concrete details possible. So if you're able to say I was volunteering at this organization for 5 years rather than just I was interning there in general, it's going to provide a little bit more validity to your application. And concentrate on your opening paragraph. The opening paragraph is what's going to draw the admissions counselor in and hook them and make sure that they're grabbing to the admissions counselor. Okay, so here's some general don'ts. Don't mention extracurriculars you completed in high school or pre-university unless it is exceptional and integral to your application. So generally, admissions counselors won't look at anything you did before your university degree. So unless it's something that's really, really important, I would suggest to not include it, just because that's also wasting space that you could use to talk about other things in your application. Repeat or contradict information. As I said, you do have a very limited space. You want to make sure you're only including the necessary information. Don't get too emotional, broad, or technical. You may be studying a technical subject that the admissions counselor may not be very familiar with. So it'd be a good idea to make sure that it's something that's understandable for the average person. Do not use contractions or be too casual. So in academic writing, you always want to avoid contractions, and you always want to make sure that you're using formal vocabulary and that you're not speaking too casually or making it sound too, you want to make sure it's at an appropriate academic level. Don't focus on the adversity, instead focus on your reaction to it. So as we saw in the other examples where the 2 students had written about their gaps in their resume and they were talking about what they learned from it, they focused instead on what was going to be indicative of them as a student in the future, rather than what had happened to them in the past. So I think if you're talking about an emotional subject, you're talking about something that happened to you in your past, it is important to really talk about what you learned from that situation and how you grew as a person. So you want to focus on that rather than focusing on the event itself. Write about controversial topics. So if you do feel that this is necessary, you'll make sure you want to expand on why it's important that you include that in your application, but generally you don't know if it's something that's going to offend the admissions counselor, or if it's a sensitive topic, you don't know if they're going to respond badly to it. So you'll want to make sure that you are not necessarily including a topic that's controversial and may not rub the admissions counselor the wrong way. Okay, so here we have an example of an opening that I wanted to take a look at. So I'll just read briefly some of the sentences that really popped out to me. So if we look at the first sentence here, it said, "It happened 2 years ago as I laid sprawled out on the floor of the library lounge at the University of Grenoble in Grenoble, France." So here in this first sentence, we already have a visual. We can picture the writer there in this setting, and it's really opened up the essay as a story. Looking down farther in that example, we see that what they were working on, an explication of the text, and they have an author name, the poem's name, and then it talks about which class they were in. I think this is really important, citing several or specific authors or poems, because this is kind of evidence of what exactly it is that interests you and what you've already studied. So being able to use specific authors or names of work also adds this is something that would be excellent to include in your essay if possible. And then looking down here, it says, "Close reading formalism, staying close, very close to the text, I was certain." So here the writer is also talking about what it is that they're attracted to in their studies. This provides more insight into the student as well and what they want to continue to study in the future in this program. So I think this is an excellent example of an opening paragraph that really draws your attention in, provides an example of this is a past experience where the student was in another country studying, so it provides a little history or a little story of their past studies, and it just kind of generally gives an overall approach to what it is, an overall idea of what it is they want to study. Okay, so once you've written the first draft of your personal statement, this is an example of an evaluative questionnaire, which will give you an idea of if you've hit the main points, if there's anything you're leaving out in your personal statement, or if there's anything else that you want to make sure that you've included. So here are some example questions that would be a good way to just evaluate how you've done in your drafts. So the first question would be, did my opening paragraph capture your attention? So as we've stressed, the opening paragraph is very, very important. You want to make sure it's something that hooks your readers in and will make them want to continue reading the essay. The second question, did you find the statement as a whole to be interesting? Was there a lot of unnecessary information? Did it all kind of follow a same theme? So this is something that you want to make sure that you haven't wasted any space in your essay, as you have very little room to explain yourself. So this is something, make sure that there's no parts that feel unnecessary. Did you find it to be well written? Does it follow academic guidelines? Are there no contractions? Is it using academic language? Number 4, is there material within the statement that seems inappropriate? So this goes back to the controversial topics, or maybe something that maybe just is not very academic, not very professional. So you want to make sure you don't include any of that within your essay. Did you notice any typos or errors? This just goes back to maybe making a simple mistake, but you want to make sure in an academic paper that you're not including any of these. And this goes through making several drafts, editing it several times, having someone else edit it. So this is a way to just make sure that you don't have any accidental errors that will make your paper seem a little less professional. Do you think the statement has distinguished me from other applicants? So this is making sure that this feels personal, that it's not just kind of reiterating everything you've said in your resume, but rather you're telling a story about yourself and you're framing yourself as a good fit for the program. This is a way that you want to make sure that it's including personal information and that more than anything, that the admissions counselor feels like they know you after reading your personal statement, or at least knows a little bit more about you. Did you understand this person's motivation for graduate school and how it fits into their story? This is, as we said earlier, making sure it feels like a natural fit within your studies. Have you explained what it is or why it is that this interests you and what it is that you want to study? And the last one, were there enough examples or was it too general? Have you provided enough information about your extracurriculars, about your education, what it is that you've studied that give a little bit more concreteness to your essay? Okay, so that was for the personal statement. This is going into the second essay that is commonly, some schools will only require one essay, but this is generally for a research project. You'll have a study research objective. So this one is a little bit different. It's a little bit longer. It's closer to 700 words, so which is about 2 pages. The stylistic guidelines are generally going to be the same. So use Times New Roman as the font, the 12-point size, 1-inch margins all around. If your personal statement talks about your past and how that led you to your present state, your study research objective is focusing on the future. So what it is that you want to study, what project you have in mind, why that institution in particular is particularly relevant to you and your studies. So when you're writing this, you want to focus on what it is you want to do at the institution. So here we see relevant educational, practical, and career experiences. So you do want to provide a little bit of context about yourself. But generally, the main story idea of it will go in the personal statement. This is connecting this to your educational and career experiences, are to be able to connect it to your future plans in the study research objective. So special interests and career plans, what it is you want to do in the future, and especially as international students, what it is that you want to do in the US. Why is it that you're interested in studying the United States? And what would you do upon your return to Mexico? What can you bring back to your country here after having studied your graduate studies in the United States? And then this last question here, why is it necessary that you conduct your research in the United States? Is there something particular interesting about their program? Is the United States a researcher or a leader in the field? You want to expand a little bit on why it is that you want to study in that particular country. Okay, so this 2-page document outlines the who, what, when, where, why, and how of what you're proposing. So this is in particular for your Fulbright. If you're applying for a Fulbright grant as well, I'll ask this of you in particular, but for all study research objectives, they're all going to follow the same layout. You'll want to make sure that you're developing a strong, feasible project, that the project you're proposing is something that can actually be done within the time span. Whether you're applying for a research project or a degree program, the proposal should indicate a clear commitment to your host country community and a description of how you will engage with it. So exactly what we were saying before of why it is that you want to be in that country, how you plan to engage with that country, even potentially outside of your studies. And why does it make sense for you to do this project at this time in your life? So what are the steps that you've taken up to this point that make this a natural progression in your career, and particularly in that country or that program? So here's some questions to ask yourself when you're beginning to write your study research plan. What is it that you propose to do, or what's exciting or new about your project? Why does it really interest you, and why are you really passionate about it? This particularly for the Fulbright program grant. How does it promote cross-cultural interaction and mutual understanding? That's a really big pillar of the program, the Fulbright program. It wants to make sure that you're engaging in the country and you're acting as a representative from that country to be able to share your background and your story, but also receptive to the country that you're studying within. So what are your plans to make this happen as well? Looking on what is important or significant about the project, why is it important to go to the United States, and how will you carry out your work? So within this, many students discuss their methodology and your goals in your statement. So what it is, how exactly you plan to undertake this project, and how will it further your academic or professional development? So looking back at, is the project feasible? You want to make sure that it's something that can be done within the time frame. Will the culture and politics impact your work at all? Will that play any role in it, or will that have any effect on it? You'll want to discuss as well. How do the resources of the host country support your project? So if you're planning to do a research methods such as interviewing or using questionnaires, how do you plan to locate your subjects? What will you include? So these are all just kind of details that you'll want to make sure highlight that your project is something that can be done and it is going to have a benefit on your studies and in the program. If there's any question regarding the feasibility of your project, so if there's anything that could sound doubtful about being able to be conducted, or if there's any maybe hesitations, these need to be addressed in the statement as well, so that the counselors have an idea that you've considered all the possibilities with this project, all of the avenues for being able to complete it. Okay, so generally, the general structure when looking at the study research objective, so you'll have context, which is your personal background. So this is, you'll want to give a little bit of background that's generally going to be saved for the personal statement, but this is just as the way of giving a little bit of introduction to start in the essay, how it's relevant to the United States and why it's important for it to be, for your project to be conducted in that country. The affiliation, so is there anything particularly attractive about the certain program that you're applying to, or what it is that draws you into that certain institution? Your preparation, so what it is that you've studied and how you've gotten to this point, and your future goals, so how you want to continue in your career studying this. And of course, also your project description, so what it is, what are the exact details about your project, and how you plan to make sure that it's feasible and something that can be conducted within the time range. So I'm generally a little bit more visual, so I found these examples that kind of give you an idea of the layout of different study research objectives. This is just goes to show you that there's no one correct way of structuring your essay. You can change it as a way that it'll make the most sense to you. But for example, in this example, we have the writer started with some context. They followed by explaining the relevance to their host country and the United States. Here they go into detail about their preparation, their background. There's a little bit of project detail. Then they close it with their future goals and how they plan to engage in the community. So here you see they've kind of used, there wasn't exactly in chunks. Here they've kind of jumped around using different examples as a way to tie it all together. If we look at a different example, here we have the writer started with context. So generally we'll see that among all of the essays. They'll give a little bit of background about themselves, and then going into their relevance to the host country, that actually took up quite a bit of their essay, then going into the project details, and then the preparation and future goals. So this has changed a little bit here. They kind of expand a little bit more on the relevance to the host country, but as you see, the project details are also included throughout the essay. And lastly, we have one other example. So here we have some context in the beginning, followed by the relevance to the host country, and then here they give quite a little bit of project description, longer than we've seen in the other essays. They go to the preparation, community engagement, and then they close with their future goals. This one, as you can see, is a little bit more in separate chunks. The ideas aren't as mixed throughout the essays. So this is just to give you an idea that there's no one correct way of structuring your essay. You can break it up however you want, but these are generally how you want to include all of these different parts within your study research objective. Okay, so here we have an example. This is an example of the opening paragraph of one study research objective. So as we see, I'll read the first sentence here. In my experiences as a pre-professional psychological worker, I have adopted a working hypothesis that the majority of outpatient treatable mental health problems stem from negative childhood experiences. So here we have a little bit of insight about the writer herself. This is what she wants to study. This is what she's investigated. And then if you see in the next paragraph, she starts by talking about when we were children, my father used to get my sister and me. So then she goes a little bit more into her background. Going down farther into the last paragraph, her own area she talks about herself more, but she talks about the questions it provoked. And this she goes into farther in the essay about including these in her research. So this is a way, as you can see, how she's broken it up. She's provided a little bit of context, providing her what she wants to study and a little bit about her background, but then she uses this to kind of lead into her research project and what it is that she wants to investigate. So here's just one example of how she's broken it up in her opening paragraph. Okay, so that was for the study research objectives. Here are just for some general grammar tips as you're writing. You'll want to include these in both of the essays. These are just for any academic writing papers that you'll want to include these tips. So we have avoid passive voice and use active voice whenever possible. So here's an example. Active would be I wrote the personal statement, but passive would be the personal statement was written by me. This active voice, it really puts the emphasis on the writer here. So here we see an active, that I is kind of the emphasis. I wrote the personal statement, whereas in passive, the personal statement was written by me. So in the passive voice, the personal statement is really receiving the emphasis. In active voice, you generally just sound a bit more confident, a little bit more direct. Passive voice kind of shifts the emphasis. So you want to make sure when you're writing, especially in a personal statement where you're talking about yourself, you want to make sure that you're driving the emphasis to yourself. Here's another example. When I was an undergraduate, I saw a shocking example of social injustice. That was the active example. If we go to the passive, an example of social injustice shocked me when I was an undergraduate. So here we see that when I was an undergraduate, the writer there is of main importance here in the active example, versus the passive, an example of social injustice kind of takes the emphasis. So you want to just make sure that whenever you're writing, particularly about yourself, you're using the active voice. Here we have in this second point here, avoid opening your personal statement by writing in the present tense unless what you're writing about is something that's actually taking place in the present tense. So, for example, if you're writing about a story, don't write in the present tense if it's a story that happened in the past. If the story happened in the past, then you'll want to write it in the past tense. I know it seems like it can feel a little bit more dramatic if you're writing in the present tense, but it doesn't. It just tends to turn out a little confusing. So if it is a story that happened in the past, you want to write it in the past tense. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. Okay, so this is from the Western Michigan University Writing Style Guide. And this is a style guide that you can find online for free, and it has wonderful advice about different grammar topics or different spelling topics. So for this one, particularly as it applies to academic writing and writing about different programs, it has good advice about capitalization or about just how things should be written. So for example, except for languages such as English, French, and Japanese, the names of academic disciplines, so majors, minors, programs, and courses of study, they are not proper nouns, and they shouldn't be capitalized. So be careful with this when you're writing about your program of study. So for example, she majored in integrated supply management and German. So we'll see that integrated supply management is not capitalized while German is because it's a language. If you're referring to a specific class, so for example, here we have Accelerated Introductory Chemistry or Dr. David Sedeva's Biology of Cancer class, then it is a specific course title, and so you do want to capitalize that. So class titles will be capitalized. For academic degrees, they're only capitalized when the full name of the degree is used, such as Bachelor of Arts or Masters of Social Work. General references such as bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degrees are not capitalized. So you use an apostrophe with bachelor's degree and master's degree, but not in Bachelor of Arts or Master's of Science. Okay, so this is just some general tips for capitalization, particularly when it comes to courses of study. And here is the link. You can see these have a lot of helpful advice for writing and different style guidelines. Okay, so I wanted to note also the Benjamin Franklin Library in Mexico City has a lot of resources about how to write personal statements, a lot of example books. These are two particularly good ones I found here at the library. It's How to Write a Winning Personal Statement for Graduate and Professional School, and The Grad's Guide to Graduate Admission Essays. So these are located next to the Education USA office here in the Benjamin Library. And here, along with the advisors who have a lot of advice and have provide a lot of feedback, these could be wonderful resources to help you throughout your writing. So these will have a lot of general tips. They'll expand a little bit more on what I've talked about today. And here, Yandi and Sophia can also provide a little bit more advice and provide a little bit of feedback if you have any specific questions about your essays. Okay, so I thought as a way to kind of wrap up the webinar today, we'll look at two examples. So these were written by the same person. This is their first personal statement, and then later it goes on into their study research objective. So we won't read it all, but I thought this could give you a good idea of how to include what exactly should go in each of the essays. So we can just I'll read here the first essay as just to give you an idea of how she's opened her essay. I decided that I wanted to be a scientist while I was still in elementary school. But even in high school, where I was praised for my academic successes, my relatives were still against the whole idea. So this really has a personal feel to it. She's talking about herself as a child, so going back into her history. and it brings in a little bit of her family. So maybe her parents or her relatives weren't as supportive, so you see that it's been something of perseverance for her to continue studying this. So as she goes through this essay, she talks about as a freshman at Smith University. She talks about her studies there. The spring of my sophomore year, I applied for a research course, talking about specific courses and what she's learned throughout those. And then here, not just including particularly like the courses and the specific academic coursework, here she talks about her study abroad experience and how that had an effect on her. So this, I think, just gives a little bit more of a rounded idea of who this student is. She talks about her studies, but also her family. She brings in a little bit more of her personal subjects, her study abroad experience, and how that had an effect on her character. So here you can see in the personal statement, she's talking more about her past and how that's led her to where she is currently and why she wants to continue to study this. If we go on to her research objectives, here so we can see it. We'll read the first sentence just so you have an idea of the opening paragraph and to see how it's giving, how it's developed. At 1:47 in the morning, September 21st, 1999, the town of Chai in Nantao County, central Taiwan, began to shake violently. So this gives a little idea of what it is that she's probably planning to study something related to this, right? But the way she's framed it, it gives it more of a narrative feel. So if we continue, we see her talking about this specific event, and then she goes into herself. So this is a little personal context, and then it's talking about why she's interested in how it relates to this event. So here, as you can see farther down in the fourth paragraph here, by studying the physical characteristics of rocks, she's explaining more about what she's studied in the past and how that's related to where she is currently and what she's done in the previous studies. If you look at farther down at the bottom of the first page, here she's citing a specific professor that she's worked with and what specific faculty she studied with at that point. And what I really liked about her study research objective essay is we see the 5 tests she would perform on the drill course. So this here, you see her specific ideas for this project, how she's planning to carry out her project and what exactly it is that she wants to do. So if you look under the 5 points, these analyses would be conducted for a half year of study. She has a timeline set. So here, I think what's really valuable about her example is that she's given a specific timeline and specific details about how it is that she plans to carry out this work. So these, if you look in the Benjamin Franklin Library, there's a lot of books that have examples just like this that can kind of give you an idea of different statements of grants, and this will give you kind of an idea of how it is that these essays can be structured based on if you're talking about certain parts of your project, if you want to include more personal context. This could give you a good idea of how it is that your essays should be structured. Okay, so let's look at any personal specific questions. So let me just go back to so I've received a couple questions, so we'll just go into those. So I received a question about if you've traveled to different countries, but through volunteer service. And I think that would be, you want to make sure that this is relating to something that you want to study within your program. I think generally that if it's just kind of for tourism purposes, I don't know that would necessarily be as relevant. But if it's something that you have done volunteer work in, or maybe it was an extracurricular activity having traveled, I think that would be something valuable to include, especially if there was maybe a certain experience you had while doing that while having that event. But I think generally, if it is just for having traveled, you want to make sure it's something that relates more to your studies. What are we? Okay, the next question. For my project, I had someone who asked about my project. This is generally for the study research objective. It's going to be if you're studying something that requires a project. This won't always be the case. Some programs will just have you'll be doing a thesis or you'll be doing some other type of work. So this is generally not required for all programs. You'll want to investigate to make sure that this is something required. But if it's a study research objective, it's a general project that's going to require some specific investigation. So when you're applying, you'll see if that's something that's required of each school, which for a lot of schools, it's not. You'll just need to have one essay. So something you'll want to make sure when you're applying. Applying. Okay, so there's a question, address any extenuating circumstances. Or what kind of info? Okay, so I take that to mean that generally if you have, as we talked about before, if you have any gaps or discrepancies that you want to explain, I think this is what that's referring to, then that would be a space to do that. So if your application provides you the space to do that, that's something that you would want to take advantage of, so you wouldn't need to use that space in your personal statement. But generally, if you don't have anything that you want to explain, I believe that you can just leave that blank. Is it good to mention? Yes, I have a question. Is it good to mention some professors I'm interested in working with in the statement of purpose? I think generally that would probably go with more in the study research objective, if that's something that you're going to write and include in your application. But if there are specific professors that you want to work with, I think that would be a really valuable source to include, because it does show that you've taken initiative to research and that you sought out certain people that you would want to work with. So I would say generally that would be something very good to include in your application. Okay. Well, I think that's all of the questions that I've received. Thank you all for attending. I want to say if you have any additional questions, Education USA is a really good resource here. They're here at the Benjamin Franklin Library, but you can also reach out to them online or through email as a way to address any other questions. And they'll be holding other events like this in the future, so they'll be an excellent resource as you continue to work on your essays. So thank you all very much, and have a good day.